Hello, everyone, and welcome to Police Off the Cuff, Real Crime Stories. I'm your host, Bill Cannon. I'm a 27-year PD, and with me tonight, I'm hearing some feedback here. With me tonight is my co-host, Phil Grimaldi, straight out of Brooklyn, retired detective Phil Grimaldi. How you doing tonight, Phil?
I'm doing pretty good, Billy, and I'm looking forward to digging into this. This is some interesting case.
Yeah, this is going to be fantastic. And with us tonight, of course, is our guest, legendary Manhattan District Attorney, retired now a defense attorney in his own practice, Dan Bibb. Hey, Dan, how are you?
I'm good, guys. How you guys doing?
Good. I was a little nervous. I think I missed the second B in your name, and that's why the StreamYard wasn't going through. But
hey, listen, people take a B off, they add an S, and I get no respect.
Listen, we have a new trailer, and before I introduce the show, I want to play our new trailer, and we're going to come right back. But my son actually edited this for us, and I'm very proud of it. There has to be some common sense.
Yes, sir. They have a car stop at 10th and Grand Michael Bar.
We still don't know who pulled the trigger.
Pretty cool.
I like that. That was good.
Well, my son is actually an editor by profession, but I want to say that he did this for me for free, but he didn't. It cost me $350. So, but he actually had to buy them.
You gotta wait cheap, man.
But I had to pay for the music too. The music isn't
free. Pay the kid what he's worth, would you?
I did, but I paid for his college too.
You cheap SOB, you.
Dan, they don't appreciate that. I'm sure you have daughters. You paid for their college, maybe even law school. They don't appreciate it, right?
Billy, this
hey, Bill.
Out of the Patreon, is it?
Bill, that's why I'm still working.
That's true. Pay for education.
Billy, this isn't your son that cut out of the Patreon, is it?
No, it's the other son. These guys,
okay.
one Dan cuts out of paying our Patreon for a damn $7 a month, and I was like, "You prick!" I go, "He can't pay $7 a month to watch our show."
Oh God!
Milwaukee Civilian, thank you so much for the 1999 super chat. Very much appreciated, guys. One of the reasons we brought Dan Bibb on tonight, besides the fact that he's a good friend and a fantastic district attorney and now a fantastic defense attorney, is he had a real infamous case back in 2000, and it was actually featured recently on 2020, right? It was
it was 2020 did a 2-hour piece on a case that Steve Sirocco, my close friend and still my close friend and colleague, tried in. Began investigating actually in 97, charged in 99, and tried in 2000 of a doctor who killed his wife and dumped her out of an airplane over the Atlantic Ocean. So
now, Dan, one of the biggest reasons we wanted to bring you on is because we have a case that we're gonna sort of marry up to this at the end, but we first want to, of course, talk about this case, and that's what we want to put together is that the difficulties of prosecuting a homicide case without a body being recovered. And now this Dr. Bierenbaum was a young, here he is, a picture of him and his wife, Gail Katz. That's probably back when they were very young. I don't know if that's before they were married. Here's a picture of them when they were getting married. But he seemed to be like a young boy genius. He was a Renaissance man. He spoke several languages. He was a surgeon, a plastic surgeon, and he also was a pilot. He flew an airplane. But it turned out he was quite an abusive husband. You want to talk about that?
Well, he not necessarily physically abusive. I think he was more mentally abusive and controlling. Their relationship really got bad soon after they were married. He, according to all the people that we talked to, and many of whom testified at trial, he was extremely controlling. To the point that when she was actually studying for the graduate record exams, he came home one night and caught her having a cigarette on their balcony on the Upper East Side and strangled her to the point of unconsciousness for smoking a cigarette.
I'd say that's pretty physically abusive, though.
That was the only allegation of physical abuse, but the mental abuse and controlling nature of where they went, what they did, who they saw, who she could be with, who she could be friends with, that was part of their lives. He was in control of the relationship. Interestingly enough, they lived in a very famous building, moving on up to the east side.
Yeah.
I don't remember the name of the show now. It's slipping my mind.
Jeffersons.
There you go, the Jeffersons. They lived in that building. And of course, his father owned the apartment and paid the mortgage. So
Dan,
they lived there.
I'm getting an echo here.
Yeah, I am too.
I have a question about the smoking, though. What was she a smoker and she wasn't supposed to be smoking on the terrace, or he didn't? She was hiding it from him.
I think she smoked when she was under stress, which I don't know how often it was. Her friends really never described her as a steady smoker, but there were times when there was stress in her life with regards to her educational career that she would occasionally have a cigarette.
But I'm just trying to get out what set him off about the fact that she was smoking on the terrace, because that seems very matter of factly for me. I mean, was it like, that's not like a mortal sin, smoking a cigarette on the terrace? And
according to Robert Bierenbaum, it was.
Okay. So like
he was rabidly anti-smoking.
Okay. Now I get it. Okay.
So Dan, one of the things that I want our audience to understand here is that Gail Katz, who is Robert Bierenbaum's wife, went missing in 1985, correct?
August of 1985, correct.
Okay, and you didn't get this case until 2000, isn't that right?
No, we got the case in 97.
Okay.
Andy Rosenzweig, much credit to Andy Rosenzweig, retired NYPD captain, and then in 97 was the chief investigator for the Manhattan DA's office, had probably 40 or 50 investigators working under him, brought the case to Steve Sirocco and me after we had done a case together with him. We had done a double homicide with him, and he brought the case to us and said, I think you would like to take a look at this.
That's Steve Sirocco on the
right on 2020. Now. Yeah, and we read through the files and said, absolutely, we would love to take a look.
And what did you think when you first looked at it of your potential of getting a conviction?
Well, when we first looked at it, we didn't go in. First of all, when you're doing cold cases, you have to go into them with an open mind. You can't go into them with a conclusion that you've already reached. Andy, of course, told us that he thought that Bob Bierenbaum had killed his wife, but we've got to put that out of our minds and go into it with an open mind. Look at what has been done, and redo everything that's been done in the past, and then move forward. So the first things we did were we went out and we interviewed all of the people that had been interviewed, friends and relatives. Obviously, his family we didn't want to clue his family in the beginning, but all of her friends. And then we tracked down where they moved. They moved to Las Vegas. Stephanie Youngblood testified at trial. One of his many conquests out in Las Vegas. So, we followed him around wherever he went after he moved from New York. And that was to Las Vegas and then to Minot, North Dakota. And we interviewed every witness that had been interviewed in the past. We searched out witnesses that had never been interviewed. And strikingly, after he was charged, we started getting phone calls from people who'd basically seen it on the news, said, hey, I think we have information that you should know about. One of whom was we thought we knew who his first girlfriend after his wife disappeared was. We were wrong. Literally the day after he was charged, I got a call from a woman in California who refused to identify herself for a week, telling me that we should talk to her. When I finally convinced her to identify her, she told me a whole bunch of things. She ended up testifying at trial. Her name was Karen Caruana. She ended up testifying at trial. And when she finally told us what she knew, Steve and I were on a plane to California the next day to go out and meet her. And then we were contacted by, we knew that he was hanging out in the Hamptons after his wife disappeared. We knew he and his wife had a share in a house in the Hamptons. We didn't know where, we didn't know who, we didn't know anything until my phone rings and I have on the phone a woman who says, I think I know something about this. She actually lived in Livingston, New Jersey. And the next day I went out to Livingston, New Jersey and interviewed her. Then she told us about other women that were in the house with them. And we got in touch with them immediately. And the woman who had called me was Susan DeAndrea. She testified at trial. Another woman who she told us was in the house, the owner of the house, was Dolores Erickson. She testified at trial. So the investigation didn't end with his indictment. It continued after his indictment because it was all over the press when he was arraigned, and people were calling us with information from California, from New York, from New Jersey. So it just didn't stop with him being charged. It continued.
Dan, can I just ask you a question?
Sure.
Now? With this case, I mean, it obviously it laid dormant for what would have been 12 years, would it be?
No, it was actively investigated by missing persons and the 19th Squad, and the DA's office participated through probably 87, but it still was investigated sporadically, periodically by missing persons and the 19th Squad through 1989.
It seemed like the family was involved in regards to not letting this go. They were convinced that he had killed her from the very beginning.
Elaine Katz, Gail's sister, was convinced early on that he had killed her. And she was convinced early on that he had flown her out over the ocean and dumped her body. And it turns out she was right. So Elaine didn't let it rest. She was in periodic contact with people in the DA's office. She was in periodic contact with people in missing persons. Tommy O'Malley was the missing person detective who, by the way, I'm friends with and am still in touch with. I talk to Tommy probably once a month.
Hey, Dan, did he know? Did the perpetrator, Dr. Bierenbaum, know that this investigation was going on? Did he have any clue?
No, he had no idea until
he didn't know that he was the subject of the that it seemed like he was responsible. He had no clue.
No, we didn't let him know probably I don't remember exactly when it was. I think it was February of '99. He was living in Minot, North Dakota. By the way, the coldest place in the lower 48 states, in lower 48. I went to Vegas a couple of times on the case, went to a number of other places, but Minot, North Dakota, I was not going to in February. So we sent some.
Unless you were sitting at a bar in North
Having a
Dakota.
hot toddy in front of a fireplace.
Exactly. So we sent Andy Rosenzweig, the chief, and our investigator, Tommy Pond, flew out to Minot and did a dawn raid on him coming out of his house saying, Dr. Bierenbaum, we're from the Manhattan DA's office. We'd like to talk to you about his wife, about your wife. And he nearly fainted.
Wow.
And he caught himself and said, I'm not talking to you. I'm represented by an attorney. And, I sent him out there with instructions. Listen, this is what you got to say. Are you still represented by the attorney that was representing you back in 1985? He said yes. They ceased any attempt to question him at that point.
But 14 years later, it seems like he thought he got away with it. I mean, if he almost fainted.
No, there's no doubt he thought he got away with it.
Yeah.
But it was about an hour later, I got a call from his lawyer. And he said, what the hell, Dan, what are you guys doing? And I said, well, Scott, we've reopened the investigation into the disappearance of his wife. He's obviously a target. We wanted to see if he was still represented by you. Given the lapse of time, we didn't know whether your relationship had continued. He, screamed and yelled at me about how unethical I was sending detectives to talk to him. And I said, Scott, I said, lighten up. I said, your client's got more problems than just us trying to talk to him. He immediately said, I am shipping you, if you present this case to the grand jury, my client wants to testify. And I said, Scott, we welcome your client's testimony before the grand jury. Of course, he never did. And then it was shortly after that a long-term grand jury was impaneled and evidence began to be presented. And ultimately, an indictment was returned, and we negotiated his surrender. He was released on $500,000 bail, and went to trial in September into October of 2000. And there was probably about a week of pretrial hearings, and then 5 weeks of trial. And he was actually swiftly convicted. They called one witness that we turned over to them that said that who said that he had seen her at a time when our theory was that she was already dead. He was proven to be well-meaning but mistaken. The jury went out, I believe it was on a Wednesday afternoon, late in the afternoon. They deliberated for an hour or so. They came back the next day. They deliberated for maybe another hour, hour and a half, 2 hours, and they convicted them. So it really wasn't, and I thought that jury deliberation, based on my experience, having done many, many homicide trials by then, that this was either going to be a swift acquittal or a long conviction. In other words, if the jury came back quickly, they would acquit him. It would take them longer to analyze the evidence and convict him. So when we got word that the jury had come back with a verdict, Steve and I and another colleague who also was involved in the trial were out in the hallway saying, I said, listen, guys, I think we got to be prepared. And we were all kind of shook our heads and said, yeah, this may not be good. But the jury saw it for what it was. There was not just, and the thing is, although there were never any direct admissions by him, his words throughout the years were the bulk of the evidence that convicted him. There was always the common theme of her walking out of the apartment on a Sunday morning and not returning, but he lied repeatedly, often to many different people about what happened after that, what led up to it, and what happened after it, what he did after it. One of the things that he didn't tell anybody, which took a while for the DA's office to uncover, was that he went out that afternoon and flew a plane for 2 hours out of Essex County Airport from Cornwall, New Jersey. And, people, he omitted it. Well, that's not true. He lied about it, because when he was interviewed by Virgil Dowsass from the 19th Squad and then Tommy O'Malley from Missing Persons, they told him, you really have to be 100% honest with us about everything that happened, everything that she did, everything that you did. And what he did is he told them that after she walked out of the apartment, he waited for a couple of hours, then went to a birthday party for his nephew at his sister's house in Montclair, then went to a friend of his house in West Orange, New Jersey, and then just went home and went to bed. And it wasn't until the next morning that, when she didn't show up at various appointments, people were calling him, that he eventually went to, it was 28, 30 hours after she's gone that he finally goes to the police. But what he does is he leaves out the fact that he goes to the airport and he flies.
Right.
And so he omitted it. No, there are lies of omission and lies of commission. This was a lie of commission, because they repeatedly stressed to him that you got to tell us everything. Everything she did, everything you did.
Dan, let me say, for the detectives that interviewed Dr. Bierenbaum, did he have that nasty type of attitude that he was much smarter than them, or did he receive them as his equal intellectually in the game of questioning and answering?
Virgil Dowsass, very smart guy. He's the first guy that Bierenbaum talks to. And, Dowsass tells us, which unfortunately really can't come out at trial, was that Bierenbaum seemed to think he was smarter than everybody. Tommy O'Malley from Missing Persons gets involved, I think, about 2 days later, and basically said the same thing, that he was rather condescending, that he, was offended by some of the questions that were being asked. But unfortunately, when you're on the witness stand, those are feelings that detectives can't testify to.
Right.
We tried to bring out through both Virgil and Tommy that, this was a conversation between equals, but, Bierenbaum didn't view it that way.
He was condescending until 14 years later when they showed up in North Dakota and he almost fainted. I bet he wasn't condescending then.
No, obviously what he did is he ran back inside his house and called his lawyer and said, there's guys here talking about my wife, can you find out what's going on? And that's, within the hour.
That was after he cleaned up the mess in his underwear. Then he did that. Then he made that. Hey, Dan, let me ask you, the little bit of research I did, I read, it said that you, I think this was a quote from you, that there was a loveless and violent marriage, and that she was leaving him for another man. That was the night that she was killed. Was that ever true? Was that ever proven that she was going to leave him for someone else?
Yes, as a matter of fact,
interviewed?
she had 2 affairs, though both of those men testified at trial.
Okay.
One was with a real estate executive who she saw for a month or 2. And then one was with a professor of psychology, PhD in psychology, had a private practice, was also a teacher. I can't remember where he taught. It was one of the colleges in New York, where he was a professor. I met him on the train and had actually told a close friend of hers who they were getting their nails done. I believe it was Saturday morning. Had told her friend that she was going to tell her husband the next morning, which was the fateful Sunday, that she was leaving him. And that came out as what's called, which is an exception to the hearsay rule called a statement of future intent. And my argument to the jury was that that's exactly what she did. That she said, I'm leaving you. And there were some financial shenanigans that his father was allegedly involved in. Was a doctor. He was a medical doctor as well. We never found out if that was true, but she believed it was true and told her friend, I'm going to tell him that unless he just lets me walk out the door, that I'm going public with, the financial shenanigans that you and your father have been engaging in. And it was supposedly with Medicare and Medicaid.
That sounds like a double motive to kill her, between she's leaving him for someone else, or she's leaving the marriage and she's going to blow the whistle on the father. So,
right.
It's like a double motive to kill her.
Folks, this is Police Off the Cuff, real crime stories. And if you're not subscribed to our YouTube, please go on our YouTube, hit that subscribe button, ring the bell, give us a thumbs up. And if you want to support us financially, we have a Patreon with 3 different levels. And if you want to be a part of the YouTube family for Police Off the Cuff, you see the folks in the chat in the green font. You can join us on YouTube, and we have 5 different levels there. This is a fascinating case. And what I want to draw in, because near the last maybe 15 or 20 minutes of the show, we want to draw a parallel just to the case in California of the 2 boys, Orrin and Orson West, that were missing for 3 months before their parents, who had probably killed them, reported them missing. But I want to stay on this case. But what the parallel I want to draw is that, you've obviously done an extremely thorough investigation. The fact that you're still remembering names and places tells me that you stayed sober mostly during this investigation.
Thanks, Bill. Appreciate that, man.
Yeah, because you can
he's
remember.
spitting out the facts pretty good, Billy.
He can remember dates, times, names. It's like incredible, and the law too. Spouting the hearsay rule. It's wonderful. But Dan, what I want to draw from you is the difficulty of getting a jury to believe that this man killed his wife without recovering her body.
Well, when we started out, we began to do some research about whether there had been any no-body homicides prosecuted in Manhattan. As far as we could tell, there had never been one.
Wow.
But we also did some research across the country, and it turns out that there was a no-body homicide case prosecuted in the late 40s, 1940s, believe it or not, in California, where a guy was convicted. I don't remember of who he killed. It might have actually been his wife. and went up to the California Supreme Court. And the California Supreme Court basically wrote an opinion that was a guidebook for us about how to prove someone is dead without a body. I mean, obviously, forensic evidence is helpful. You know, there was no forensic evidence then. The police were precluded from, you know, doing any kind of crime scene forensic search of his apartment. Lawyers wouldn't allow it. So we didn't have a spot of blood. We didn't have anything. But this case in California is, in my recollection, a 40-page opinion about what the prosecutors did in California to prove that this person was no longer alive. And it was a guidebook. It was a roadmap for us to follow. And it proved, that opinion proved invaluable to us to show us what we needed to prove by way of evidence. You know, was the person depressed? Now, Gail Katz had been depressed at once in her time, had actually been treated for depression. What was her state of mind at the time? You know, we had her therapist. She was in a PhD program in psychology. And as part of her PhD program, she had to see a therapist to learn how to, and her therapist was like, no, she was no longer depressed. She was great. The day before she disappeared, like I said, she got a manicure. And her therapist says, and this is probably a quote. Her therapist said, oh, and she got a mani-pedi. She got a manicure and a pedicure. Her therapist testified, and this is as close to a quote as I can get, suicidal people don't get mani-pedis. So she had recently had an IUD implanted. We had her doctor testify, and her therapist again testified suicides they're not preparing for active sex lives.
Right.
So these were all things that, you know, we looked for. And many of them had already fallen in our lap because she had never talked to, you know, she'd never been in contact with her family again. She was very close with her sister. She was very close with her younger brother. She was very close with her parents. Never talked to them again. Her friends, family, school, boyfriend, never seen, never heard from. So, you know, all of that evidence was extremely important. So there was no one piece of evidence that said she's dead. It was witness after witness after witness after witness who testified that, you know, her friends, we were in constant contact. We spoke every day by phone. We saw each other once a week. After that Sunday in August, never heard from her again. Never seen her again.
So Dave, you had a really heavy hill to climb. You had to first, you know, convince the jury that she was dead, and then you had to convince them that he was the one that killed her. I mean, that's a lot of heavy lifting.
Yes. And at the end, the defense opening statement, my recollection was, keep an open mind. We don't know what happened. We don't know whether she's alive or dead. The defense closing statement conceded that she was dead and that she died that day.
Wow.
But that's how powerful the evidence was that she wasn't alive. This was not a woman who was going to drop off the face of the earth, never contact another human being, never contact any of her friends, never contact any of her family. This was a woman who was looking forward to getting her PhD, looking forward to life, looking forward to a life without him, looking forward to a life with her psychologist boyfriend, So at the end, which kind of shocked me, when her attorney, who is now a judge sitting in Bronx criminal court, in Bronx Supreme Court criminal, conceded that she was dead, and she was dead that day.
Do you think that was a mistake on the part of the defense, Dan?
No, I actually think that he would have lost credibility if he had tried to argue to the jury that she was alive somewhere and, just hiding out.
Sure.
I think that the jurors would have just looked at him and shaken their heads and go, yeah, no.
You would have to believe in Martians and that she was abducted based on what you put forward. So I guess he conceded. Exactly. Yeah. Okay.
Dan, I want to just ask you about two pieces of evidence that may or may not be true. I know one of them is 100% true. Was there anyone that saw him carrying a duffel bag with something heavy in it to his car?
No, there wasn't. He had a car. He did not have a space in that garage. He had a space in a building about a block and a half away. But there was testimony from two girlfriends after Karen Caruana, and I can't remember the other one's name. She was also a doctor who was a girlfriend after Karen Caruana, who said that he regularly carried charts, maps, everything in a big duffel bag when he went flying.
Okay, part two to that is the log that you have to fill out when you fly a plane.
Well, first of all, it wasn't until about 8 to 9 months later that Andy Rosenzweig sent people out to first the Teterboro Airport, closest to New York, close to Manhattan, and found nothing. Of course, they should have sent him to Essex County Airport first, because that's literally a 10-minute drive from where he grew up in West Orange, and literally an 8-minute drive from where I grew up in Verona. So, they send detectives out to Teterboro. They find nothing. They send detectives out to Essex County Airport, and the first private aviation company they get to is, they say, is this aviation company. They walk in, and it's a man and wife owned business. And they say, do you know someone named Robert Bierenbaum? And they say, yes, we do. He flies here all the time. And they say, well, do you have records going back, in 1985? They say, absolutely, yes, we do. And there is his rental agreement, and there is what's called a Hobbs meter, which on a plane basically times it times the engine running. It's not flight time; it's how long the engine is running. And they explained to the detectives, everyone will do all their pre-flight checks, they'll do everything, and then only at the last minute do they start the engine, because you're paying for engine running time.
Wow.
And he flew for 1.9 hours that day. So we have now there are records of him having flown.
Dan, do you also, when you fly a plane, don't you also have to correspond with the tower when you're going to take off and land?
Yes, you do. And at Essex County Airport, which used to go by the name back then, was called Colwell Airport, is a controlled airfield. There is a tower. Yes, but you do not have to file a flight plan. You don't have to tell them where you're going, but you have to communicate with the tower. And those communications are not recorded. So, but we have the records. And
did he try to doctor? Did he try to doctor the?
Well, there's another thing. Pilots keep their own private flight logs. It's a book which basically you write in dates, times, and flight hours, and if you go somewhere, where you went. We were told by people who flew with him Stephanie Youngblood being one of them from Las Vegas, that he religiously kept a flight log every time he flew. There's no requirement by the FAA doesn't require pilots to keep a flight log. They recommend it, but we were told not just by Stephanie Youngblood, by other people who flew with him, that he was religious in keeping his flight log. After he was charged, Steve Sirocco and I sat down and said, we'd had two witnesses who told us that they had looked at his flight log for that day and it had been altered. That the date had been altered to a different date. So Steve and I sit down and say, what do you think we should do? Should we subpoena the doctor for the flight log? And we said, why not? And we did. We called his lawyer and said, Scott, we have a subpoena. We want to know if we can serve it on you, or we'll serve it on the doctor. And he goes, what are you looking for? And I said, this subpoena will speak for itself. Do you want us to serve the doctor? Do you want us to serve you? And he goes, serve me. And I said, well, somebody will be over there in about 20 minutes. So we served the doctor through his lawyer with a subpoena for the flight log, thinking if it exists and they have it, they're on an obligation to give it to us. He freaks out, calls me up and says, we're going to move to suppress. We're going to move to quash and you're going to lose. And I said, well, you're going to move to quash and we're going to win. And if you have it, you're going to have to turn it over. And we go to Judge Snyder, and Judge Snyder looks at me and says, are you crazy? You can't subpoena a defendant. And I said, well, Judge, we can. And we did. They'll file a motion to quash. We will respond, and you will enforce the subpoena. And that's exactly what happened. And the day the subpoena was enforced, in the hallway outside of her courtroom, Scott Greenfield, his attorney, turns over the flight log in an unmarked manila envelope. And of course, I want to rip the envelope open and look at it, but we just calmly walk to the elevator, get on the elevator, go down to my office, open it up, and those two witnesses were correct. He had entered the flight for that day, but went back and changed the date. We actually
what was it that made it that the judge ruled in your favor? But if the judge said you can't subpoena a defendant, was it based on the information you had from the two witnesses about the log?
Well, it's called whether the act of producing it is incriminating. It's called what's called an act of production privilege. It's part of the Fifth Amendment privilege, but we told the judge, said, listen, we're not using his act of production. We don't care that his lawyer is producing it, because we have two witnesses who will be able to authenticate it, independent of the doctors producing it. They actually went to the appellate division, and we won in the appellate division. And we got down to the office, sat down, opened up, literally ripped the envelope open, opened up to the page, and indeed it had been altered to a different date. Wow. We had it forensically examined, and the forensic examiner said there's no doubt that these are two different inks put on at two different times.
Absolutely.
That was pretty powerful.
Sure.
Very powerful. Phil, I just want you to we're going to go to a quick commercial, and we'll come back to Dan Bibb talking about the Robert Bierenbaum. He's the killer of his wife, Gail Katz.
Joe Murray, attorney at law. Have you found yourself in a jam? Are you in need of legal counsel in the New York area? Do you need a victim's advocate? Well, Joe Murray is your man. He's not only an experienced trial attorney, he's also a retired 15-year member of the NYPD. He literally knows both sides of the fence. His website is jmurray-law.com. His telephone number is 646-838-1702, or you could email Joe at jmurray-law.com.
You know, Dan, one of the things that's amazing about this case is that I think it was last year or the year before Bierenbaum came up for parole. He served 20 years. He's a 20-year to life sentence. And he confessed to doing the murder exactly the way you said he did it.
That he did. He actually won an appeal of his parole hearing. So he had another parole hearing a couple of months ago, and he again affirmed the fact that he had killed her. And unfortunately for the family, they're going to have to go through this again in 2022. But the first, I've read them, I have the minutes of both parole hearings. The first hearing was, the commissioners, I thought, were very amateurish in their questioning of him, basically accepting what he told them at face value, that he just lost his temper, for some reason or other. And the second hearing, the parole commissioners were quite a bit more probing and were not accepting of his explanations of what happened that day.
Dan, this case is so fascinating. I'm sorry, I feel like I'm feeding back here. It's so fascinating, and I wish I would have not tied this other case into it. But since we had promised our listeners that the case of the boys in California, of Orrin and Orson West, I want you to watch a little bit of this. This
Sure.
is a district attorney from Bakersfield, California, and she's letting everyone know that, in fact, Orrin and Orson West, who the parents reported missing on December 21st, 2020, had in fact been dead 3 months before that.
Also came out to assist in looking for the boys, but to no avail. They were not located. 1 week later, crucial information came to light that necessitated the involvement of the Bakersfield Police Department and the Kern County District Attorney's Office. Law enforcement worked diligently, hundreds of hours in the next 12 months, looking for the boys. This morning, I'm saddened to announce that the investigation has revealed that Orrin and Orson West are deceased. The investigation has also revealed that they died 3 months before their adoptive parents reported them missing. However, I am pleased to announce that this week, the Kern County Grand Jury indicted Trezell and Jacqueline West, the adopted parents of Orrin. The indictment charges 5 counts. Murder. Charges them both with murder, with the victim being Orrin West. Charges murder. Charges felony child abuse. Fourth count charges child abuse. Count charges
Well, you see that they were both, the parents were indicted for 2 counts of murder, and the fact that they reported the boys missing 3 months after the district attorney found out that they were in fact dead. This is another case, of course, of a homicide without the recovery of the bodies. Do you have any comments on that?
First, let me tell you, this is probably one of the most heartbreaking stories I have ever heard. Physical abuse of children is probably one of the worst crimes that you can ever contemplate. A homicide of a child is the worst, one of the worst crimes you could ever contemplate. But analytically, that having been said, analytically, it is proving the death of a child without the corpus delicti, without the body, is different than proving the death of an adult. First of all, because an adult has the capacity to leave of their own free will and to disappear of their own free will. Children are dependent on adults for their survival. These kids, they're not walking off on their own. They're not getting on a plane. They're not flying off to California. So when you're talking about the deaths of children, it's to me, just analytically speaking, and it may sound callous, it's easier to prove that they're deceased without the body than it is with an adult, because children, they're dependent on adults to survive, and they wouldn't survive without adults.
Yeah, 100%. I think
great
that's been
point.
mentioned in this case that, what you just said, that kids can't go flying around, they can't leave. And these two boys were 4 and 3 years old at the time they allegedly disappeared. And the parents, I mean, just their story and the way they interacted with the press and with everyone else was just not believable whatsoever. And I'm going to just play a little bit of their.
Before you do that played an important role in the Bierenbaum case, and that plays an important role in every case without a body, is how the perpetrators interact with the people around, not only law enforcement, but the people around them, their friends and their relatives. That speaks volumes. Like I said, Bierenbaum's interactions with all of his friends and her friends was extremely important evidence.
No, I mean, absolutely. Let me play a little bit of this, and then.
So helpless, and seeing everybody out here really looking and helping out really means a lot.
So tell us what happened the night this kid left.
Okay.
From our yard.
It was cold. I was gonna make a fire. There's a lot of wood in this area right here next to our house. I open up the back gate. I'm throwing wood, bringing it inside the house. My wife's inside. My youngest two inside.
Dan, you can just see that he's not believable. He's got his hands folded across his chest. He's talking about retrieving wood when a 4 and a 3-year-old went missing.
First of all, this is an extremely defensive posture.
Yeah, we mentioned that.
You guys know that.
Yeah.
This speaks volumes. And he's talking about wood.
She was so fidgety, she could not sit still for a second. It was unbelievable. So obviously they were displaying, body language of people that were defensive, as you just stated, and very nervous.
It's, the whole thing also, the husband, whose name is Trezell, he searched a whole 10 minutes for the kids in his car after they went missing, which is also not the actions of someone that's searching for a missing 4 and 3-year-old. Just horrendous. And all of those things will be submitted as evidence, as you went into great detail in your homicide case. There are so many things in this case. Well, the other thing is that the other kids, they had 2 biological children and 2 other adopted kids, took part in the abuse of these the 4-year-old and the 3-year-old, potentially even the homicide of the 4-year-old and the 3-year-old, which is so horrendous. And when everyone that watches this show and is following these two boys, they hear about this, they just can't even understand how something like this could happen. We in the law enforcement world, we've seen this before and we understand it. We don't, it's no easier to take, but we understand it.
The part of the problem is maybe we've become jaded. Too many bodies. The inhumanity that we've seen over our careers it's unbelievable. But still, a 3 and 4-year-old, it's unbelievable. It's extremely difficult to comprehend. Helpless children.
Yeah. I mean, it is incredible that in California, people can adopt kids to make money like these people did. It was like an adoption mill almost, that they were getting paid because the husband had no clear source of income other than, adopting kids. And that, I think, is extremely disturbing that someone in whatever jurisdiction it is, again, this is California where all kinds of crazy shit happens, right? That you can adopt kids. I mean, in New York, I think you get paid for having foster children. Isn't that true, Dan?
Yes, it is.
But I don't think you get, once you adopt kids, I don't believe you get
once
paid.
you adopt kids, you're done. You're done getting. There's no gravy train once you adopt them.
Apparently in California, if a kid is has special needs or something like that, they still get paid when they adopt children of that ilk. I don't know if ilk was the right word, of that type. And
public assistance. If you have multiple children, that increases public assistance in New York. Not sure about California. I think the point that you're making, Billy, about these kids might have been special needs, so there was some other stipend that they were able to, throw some money their way. But I know that if you're getting public assistance in New York, the more children you have, the larger the amount. I mean, I don't know how much more it is, but so again, they were cashing in on these kids. That's the motive. It's disgusting what happened. And that comment that woman Margaret put up about why would they wear masks outside in public? Again, their posture. She was nervous. The mask helped them to tell the lie. You can't really see their faces, and
their conduct is going to. Their conduct post reporting them, after they reported them missing, is going to be important evidence. Like Bill, you had mentioned before about the guy had spent maybe a hot 10 minutes looking for the kids. Bierenbaum's conduct was the same thing. He had to be basically forced to go and make posters and go and look for his wife in the park, and his, throw up his hands and said, he would say stupid stuff like, she's probably living on a beach in California. That was a piece of evidence in the trial. One of her friends says, yeah, we're trying to get him to go and look for his wife. And he's like, yeah, she's living on a beach in California somewhere.
Well, so because then intellectually, he knew she was dead. He knew she was dead. So to him, what am I searching for? But he didn't want to let you know that she was dead.
I guess that was one of the proactive or reactive lies based on his conversations post.
Well, it was you're right, Phil. Exactly. My summation arguments were there were reactive and proactive lies, repeated. Lies that he would say to react to people asking him, or accusing him. And then there were proactive lies where he would just lie because he felt he had the need to. And conduct, post-disappearance conduct is also important and will be important in the case against the parents. But in Bierenbaum, he's going out to, Bill, I don't know if you remember, there was a notorious disco out in the Hamptons called Marrakesh.
Yes.
Back in the 80s.
Yep.
He was at Marrakesh every weekend. Now, we knew before the indictment that he was out there, but we didn't know who he was partying with. We had actually people who he knew, her friends, saw him out there until after the post-indictment, the people who he rented the house from called us and told us about this. And they testified about his post-disappearance conduct. His wife's been missing for no more than a week, and he's dancing his ass off at a disco
At Marrakesh.
in the East End.
Wow.
So, post-disappearance conduct can be devastating evidence, and I'm sure it's going to be devastating evidence against these parents. And I'm sure the DA's office knows that.
Well, I think the DA's office has had a big head start. These are the legal aid attorneys that are representing Trezell and Jacqueline West, and they had a press conference the other day, and they were arguing about stuff like it wasn't fair that they brought this grand jury together, and a grand jury is not a trial; it is just an instrument used by the government, and we're going to have our day in court. But they seemed very amateurish in addressing these issues. You watched a little bit of the press conference of the district attorney from Bakersfield, California, and she's a super professional, and she was very clear and concise about what she spoke about.
She also appeared to be very emotional.
Yes.
She also appeared to be holding back on the emotions, So, I mean, hey, listen, you got kids, you know what you're talking about with a homicide of a child. If you've had children, yeah.
Yep. And
Dan,
even
the lawyer, the defense attorneys. See, I tried not to participate in the press conferences that the office would do about my cases, although I would be ordered to sometimes, simply because I thought it was inappropriate for us to be talking about something when the guy's just been accused, hasn't been convicted. And same thing with defense attorneys. I think the best thing you do is you have no comment. And we're at the beginning of a process that has to play out.
Dan, there seems to be a trend right now where people want to try things in the press and on TV and social media. I mean, we covered a lot of the Alec Baldwin thing, the shooting.
Right.
And he feels that he has to go and comment all the time. And he doesn't realize all of that stuff is going to be played absolutely at the civil trial. But if there's a criminal trial, it'll also be played at the criminal trial. And he just thinks he has to go in on social media and talk about this. I mean, it's so stupid that he does that.
Well, I'm not so sure he's the brightest bulb on the circuit, Bill. Listen, I don't think any of the Baldwin guys are all that bright. And if I'm his lawyer,
I was going to say that.
I'm going to gag him.
Yeah.
I'm going to gag him.
His lawyer should be kicking him in the ass and saying, "Shut the hell up. What's wrong? You're digging yourself a deeper hole, But I don't know. I guess he's
well, as when I first started in the DA's office, my boss was a guy by the name of Warren Murray, and Warren Murray had rules. It was Warren Murray's rules. And rule number 1 is no witness, no case. right? No evidence, no case. Okay. Rule number 7 is every defendant says something about the crime he's accused of. And rule number 7A is whatever a defendant says will help you in prosecuting that case. And to this day, Rule 7 and 7A are 100% true. Always. When a defendant opens their mouth, it's good for the prosecution.
You know, Dan,
if it's not an admission, if it's not a confession, if it's some nonsensical exculpatory statement, it can be used by the prosecution in some way or another. So,
Dan, I think that even lawyers are going on the media. We covered the Gabby Petito case, and her attorney Stephen Bertolino. That guy couldn't stay off TV, and he got eviscerated by Ashley Banfield on News Nation.
Right?
She destroyed him, and I was like, why is this guy going on TV? And a journalist. I mean, a journalist shouldn't be able to destroy an attorney, but she did.
You know what? I think he needed his 5 minutes of fame. He obviously was never in that kind of public view. The cameras, he got caught up in the cameras, and she did the job on him for sure. But
so I'll tell you a funny story. You know, you guys know what perp walks are, right? Of course. So after the Bierenbaum verdict, we go down to my office. And there's 3 lawyers. There was me, Steve Sirocco, and a guy by the name of Adam Kaufman. He was our third seat. He basically was the guy carrying the bags. So we go down to the office, and of course there's like 100 people waiting for us at Forlini's. And there was a paralegal who was diabetic outside my office who was having problems with his diabetes, and we had to take care of him. So we're delayed. My phone's ringing off the hook. Where the hell are you guys? Where the hell are you guys? And we're taking care of a guy who's potentially going into a diabetic coma. We get the medical guys from the office down. We get EMS down, and our main concern is now we got to take care of this guy. So he finally gets some food in him, finally comes around and everything, but they take him to the hospital. So now we're delayed a half hour, 45 minutes. And of course, we're looking out the window and there's still press everywhere. But they're mostly in front of 100 Center Street. So Steve says to me, what do you think? Should we perp walk ourselves? I said, what are you talking about? What do you mean perp walk ourselves? He goes, no, we usually go out the back door and run over to Forlini's to avoid the press. Why don't all 3 of us walk out the front door and just right into the cameras? And that's what we did. We walked out the front door of 100 Center Street into the waiting cameras, who were walking 3 abreast, Victory, and walking down, Center Street towards White Street to take the right and go to Forlini's. And the cameras are backing up, and the reporters are sticking mics on our faces. And we're just laughing, going, we finally got to Forlini's. I was like, I can't believe we just perp walked ourselves.
That's great.
Dan, you gave such great information about this, and I think it was fascinating how you found that California case that you referred to as the roadmap and how to prosecute a homicide case without a recovered body. I mean, fascinating. And that there's someone out there that deserves credit for that. And I just can't remember who it is, but it's not me. You sound like Alec Baldwin.
No, that's called blame.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
know someone is guilty. I know it's not me.
I know it's not me, right? There was someone, I don't remember who it was, turned us on to that case and said, "Hey, you guys got to read this case from the 40s and from California." And I remember, like, how the hell would you know about a case from the late 40s in California of a no-body homicide? And I don't remember who it was. Maybe Steve does. You know what? I may have to call Steve tomorrow and say, who turned us onto that California case? But somebody did. I would like to say it was, hours of late night research, legal research, with, black coffee. And no, it wasn't. It was somebody said, hey, there's this California case you guys could read.
Yeah, but that was absolutely integral to the prosecution because
it was.
The format on which you had to prove death first and then, who did it. So that was really, really interesting stuff. I think you really, this was some case. I can't even imagine all the twists and turns. And
Dan, just to mention the 2020 thing, I don't think 2020 let you and Sirocco talk enough. They got all fluffed out. I was like,
exactly.
These are the stars of the case. And they had the family on more than you guys.
I thought they did a good job. Elaine Katz, I'm okay. Elaine and
what made them do it for all these years, though, Dan?
Pardon?
What made them do it? The case was tried in 2000, no?
Because he was coming up for parole.
Okay.
In 2020.
Makes sense.
And when I found out the day before, actually part of my interview, one part of my interview was at Forlini's. One part of my interview was at the airport, and the other part was at this library in Midtown, an engineer's library in Midtown Manhattan. That was where Steve and I were together. And well, I lost my thought.
Listen, ABC doesn't give 2 hours to just any case. I think
here's the thing. The day before my interview at Forlini's, I got a text message from a friend of mine who's still in the DA's office that said Bierenbaum confessed in his parole hearing. I nearly fell over. I got on the phone. I was like, what the hell are you talking about? I said, who knows this? How do you know this? She says, call Elaine Katz. So I call Elaine and she goes, I just got the minutes. I can't believe it. She emailed me the minutes. And then at the interview, right towards the end of that interview, they shoved the minutes in front of me. And I said, yeah, I got these yesterday. And I said, it's stunning. I said, I never thought that he would ever admit that he killed his wife.
Well, that's what these parole hearings, they look for remorse a lot of times. And
if you read these minutes, there's no remorse from him.
Well,
none.
Okay.
And the thing is, I know, I've been doing this for almost 40 years on both sides. You read a transcript. How do you get emotion out of a transcript? How can you tell?
What I'm trying to say is that if I'm sure that the inmates will study, previous parole hearings and stuff, and they know that if you lie to the parole board and say you didn't do it when there's an overwhelming amount of evidence, that's the point I was trying to make. Not so much remorse. I shouldn't have said use the word remorse, but I guess the point is, if they know, it's a slam dunk case, and they believe, because they get to review it, and now you're going to go in there and lie to their faces, the chances of them letting you out aren't very good.
Well, here's one of the things. An observation, I get notified from the DA's office when guys I sent away get released. And I had a guy, my first cold case was also from 1985, believe it or not. I tried it in 96. or 97. It's my first whole. That's what got me involved. That case was a homicide of a lawyer from the 13th precinct, and that's what got me interested in cold cases. I tried the case to conviction. The guy gets 20 to life. He is always denied. He got out. You know, the bank robbers from the Upper West Side.
Oh, from the 2-4, yeah.
Those guys, they never admitted anything. They're out.
Mhm.
You know, I can't even tell you how many homicides that they've gone to parole board. They've gone to Andy Cuomo parole boards.
Yeah, there you go.
And continued to deny, and they got out. And I thought that, you know, with the appropriate amount of contrition and remorse, that Bierenbaum would get out. And interestingly enough, I know his lawyer very well. She's a friend. And I've seen her since she's represented him. I don't talk to her about it. She actually didn't want me to know about it because she thought I'd be mad at her for representing him. And I'm like, you're a lawyer. You got to make a living. You know, he's paying you. I'm okay. You know, but we don't talk about it. I said, you know, I don't want to know what he's telling her and what she's telling him. But, you know, if you read these hearing minutes, especially the first one, as matter of fact as you could possibly be. I got angry. I strangled her. What did you do after that? Well, rigor mortis set in. I had to wait for it to ease. I folded her up and put her in a duffel bag, carried her out to my car. I drove out to the airport, flew over the ocean, threw her out.
Does he admit to that part of it about throwing her
Oh,
out?
yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I guess
Amazing.
the logs, everything, there's such an overwhelming amount of evidence, but who knows?
I don't know. When we were trying the case, you know, when you try a case, you know, you get a sense of how evidence is going in. And at the end, we were, all three of us, Adam and Steve and I, we were satisfied that we had tried the best possible case that we could have, that the evidence could not have gone in any better, that we would never have had a better chance at a conviction. And if we lost, we lost. You know, sometimes, as I would tell younger assistants who were afraid to go to trial, I would say, hey, sometimes you got to go with what you got. If you're convinced somebody committed the crime, you think you have the evidence, you got to go with it. And that's what our thinking was, that the case is not going to get any better. It's not going to get any worse. As a matter of fact, there were witnesses that didn't remember a lot of things, and we actually had to put in police reports as what are called past recollection recorded. So, you know, it was a tough trial, but justice was done.
Unbelievable. You know, Dan, we're at almost an hour and 20 minutes, and I didn't want to even keep you more than an hour, but it was it was so fascinating.
Absolutely.
And I mean, your recollection is very impressive. You're a fantastic lawyer. You were a fantastic prosecutor, and you're a fantastic guest. I really want to thank you for coming on the show tonight.
I'm also a fantastic defense attorney.
Yeah. There you go.
I convinced the Manhattan DA's office to dismiss a gun case in Manhattan and my client was active duty special warfare military. And this case threatened his career in the military. He made a mistake by bringing his gun into New York. But, you know, and the thing is, when the case was dismissed the other day, I thanked the Manhattan DA's office. I thanked the two assistant DAs that worked on the case, that they weren't marching in lockstep to, oh my God, anybody has a gun's got to go to prison. And the thing is, the guy is a senior chief in the Navy, and his enlistment was up March 29th. If this wasn't dismissed, he was out the door.
Wow.
And I convinced him to dismiss the case, even though, he was subject to non-judicial punishment, NJP, as they call it in the military, and it's going to have some effect on his career. He's going to re-up, and he's going to stay in the Navy.
That's
So, there's cases like Robert Bierenbaum where, you do justice, and then there's cases like this on the other side.
I was just going to say that. Justice served on the other side.
When you're on the other side and justice is served, and this guy, this guy is a hero, and he made a mistake. And under Vance, it would have been, fuck you. We're going to the grand jury. As you know, I'm not a fan of Alvin Bragg.
No.
But in this situation, I am.
Hey, Dan, did you see the new thing in the New York Times today where the new marijuana dispensaries, they want to give precedence to people who've taken a collar for weed in the past. They want to give the businesses to them and their families.
Well, they've experienced, Bill. What the hell?
Right. But they were done wrong by the criminal justice system. So let's give them the first. Where is this thinking coming from?
I don't know. Hey, listen, legalizing marijuana, I think is stupid, but it's done. What's done is done. But, prioritizing giving, marijuana licenses to people who broke the law, it just doesn't make a lot of sense to me.
No, it doesn't to me either.
No, absolutely not.
And the whole thing about, marijuana, you're sending people to jail for marijuana. Nobody went to jail for misdemeanor possession of marijuana. As a matter of fact, the only person I ever know who went to prison for marijuana was one of my clients. He got collared with 52 pounds in Manhattan. And I didn't represent him on that case until after he got collared with 19 pounds in New Jersey. He was a marijuana dealer. You'll love this story. So I get him 2 years on the New York case and 18 months concurrent on the New Jersey case. So the New Jersey case now, he's already been sentenced in New York. They got to bring him down from state prison in New York. And the judge we're in front of, I know, in Hackensack, I know very well. And, he's talking to my client at sentencing, and my client is a black guy, very smart guy, very smart, graduate of Penn State, scholarship boxer, Penn State. So the judge says, she goes, so, Mr. So-and-so, did you get a high school diploma? I'm like, Judge, the guy's black. It doesn't mean he didn't go to college, but I didn't say anything. He goes, yes, Your Honor, I did. Did you go any, your regular high school diploma or a GED? I'm like, ooh, that's, come on, Judge. And he goes, no, I have a regular high school diploma. Did you go any further in school? Yes, Your Honor, I have a college degree. The judge is like,
really?
He looks at me like, really? And I'm like, yes. Where did you go to school? Well, I went to Penn State on a full scholarship. So it's like, what? And, well, I was it was a boxing scholarship, and she goes, so when did you get out and blah, blah, blah. So have you ever held a legitimate job? He goes, well, I tried the pro boxing ranks, but it wasn't for me. So what did you do after that? I said, He goes, I went into the weed business. This is a negotiating plea, so you know, no matter what he says, he's getting 18 months. It's hysterical. The judge is looking at me going, just come up to the bench. So the two lawyers would come up to the bench. He goes, are you kidding me? Really? I said, no. He has a degree. As a matter of fact, he's got a cum laude degree from Penn State. He's a very smart guy. And you know what business he's in now?
What?
The weed business.
Illegal weed business.
Legal weed business.
It's unbelievable.
But he didn't get preference.
No.
Yeah.
Mary Rabley, thanks for the $5 super chat. Question: can the judge have the lawyers replaced in the California City Boys case so the parents can't appeal for ineffective counsel? Look, the attorneys haven't even got into the courtroom, and everyone's already saying they're ineffective counsel. So yeah, but they can't do that.
You know,
right
saying stupid stuff to the press is not ineffective assistance of counsel.
Right.
Ineffective assistance of counsel happens in the courtroom.
Good point.
And then it could result in an appeal, not probably having them removed as counsel.
Well, you can be ineffective for any number of reasons, both inside and outside the courtroom. Saying stupid things to the press is not one of them.
No.
I
think we gotta cut this off. We're almost at an hour. We're coming up on an hour and a half soon. I know we could talk all night, but our fans are like, actually, they're still hanging out. 197.
This is interesting
people.
shit. That's why
it is very interesting. You were fantastic. I mean, if I get in trouble, Dan, I'm going to be calling that number. Joe Murray. Sorry, I know you.
Yeah, Joe. I love Joe Murray. Forget about Joe.
He's good man. He's
Joe's
good
real
people.
busy with all the people all the cops that wouldn't get vaccinated. I heard he's representing all of them. Are they really going to think of firing those cops? That's crazy.
I don't know.
Right?
It is crazy, especially now since they're all saying no masks. You can go and eat. You can go and eat in a restaurant without vaccines. You can, But yeah, I love Joe Murray. Joe and I tried a case together years ago. It was hysterical. Well, it was a case in federal court in Brooklyn where the crime's on video and our client's on video committing the crime, and we kept the jury out for like 7 hours. That's cool.
Dan, Joe Murray's the only guy whose life benefited by a stupid decision.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
he would have never became a lawyer if he didn't make that stupid decision to go and punch that guy and break his jaw in the 10th squad.
And I know him too.
Oh.
I know him very well too. And you know what? That guy, I always thought was a good guy. Why Joe had to go bust his jaw up, I don't know. Murray and I, we never really talked about it.
To know that story of Joe Murray and his collar on duty.
Yeah, exactly. Busting a guy.
Phil, final words.
Final words, Dan Bibb, thank you so much for coming on and talk about this case. This was really intriguing, interesting. I don't know what other adjectives to throw at it, but I know there's a lot of heavy lifting to get that conviction. You really enlightened us on how you get a conviction on a no-body homicide. Let's hope and pray that in the other case, the Orrin and I forget the other kids, Orrin and Orson West, that case leads to a conviction and those people are sent away for a very long time, those two savages. Just as a reminder, tomorrow night, 9 p.m., we're going to be on with Tommy Dades, the encyclopedia, retired first grade detective of organized crime.
The guy, if there's no one in New York who knows more about OC than Tommy Dades.
Tom.
So we're talking about the mafia.
I don't know him personally, but I know his reputation.
Yeah, well, we're going to be.
If you want to know about OC, you got to listen to him.
Very good. That's the truth. That is the truth. And we're going to be dissecting the Ippolito and Caracappa case. The mob cops, they were two NYPD detectives that sold their shields to the mob and were actually contract killers. It was the largest disgraceful, I don't even know what else to call it, scandal in the NYPD history. So we're going to be taking that one apart tomorrow night, 9. Tune in, folks. Thank you very much to Jimmy Calandra for having us on his show.
Yeah, he was great.
Early
Thank
tonight
you,
at
Jimmy.
7 p.m. I saw a few people in the comments that came over from his show, and they subscribed to us. Thank you very much. Keep up the good work, Jimmy, and hope to collaborate with you again real soon.
And Gina G, thank you for the $10 super chat and all the love for Joe Murray. Joe Murray just showed up out of the woodwork. Look at him. he's in the chat. He heard us talking about him, I guess.
That's amazing, isn't it?
Everyone was
His ears were burning.
And there he does. He shows up and he says, I love Dan Bibb. What is this, a love fest? Dan, final words.
Great talking to you guys. Have me on anytime.
You were
Any
fantastic.
subject.
I'm going to be calling you again.
Hey, listen, I can pontificate with the best of them, even about things.
You just proved that for an hour and a half.
even about things I know absolutely nothing about.
That's great. So
I'm sure you have a great opinion.
Thank you so much for listening tonight, folks. All you guys that from Jimmy Calandra's station that subscribe to Police Off the Cuff, and thank all our fans and everyone for listening. And Dan Bibb tonight, an unbelievable guest. You were fantastic. Good night, everybody.
All right, boys. Good to see you guys.
Same here, Dan.
One episode just ain't enough.